Morning, APUSH people. So we are back in our lecture, and I'm going to talk. Let's see, it is 8:25. I'm going to talk about 25 minutes. So I don't know how far I'm going to get. Who knows what's going to take me off topic? But here we go. We are on page 5, and we are in the middle discussing religion, which was an enjoyable topic yesterday. Hope you enjoyed that. And we are going to begin looking at the individual people who make up the Great Awakening. And we started talking about Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards is on page 5, credited with starting the Great Awakening. He's the guy. He's the poster boy of the Great Awakening. And as I mentioned yesterday, it doesn't help that, number one, this is an event that is attended widely by females. And it doesn't help that Mr. Edwards is very handsome. And as I said yesterday, he is handsome, definitely by 1734 standards. And he's just really handsome even in the 21st century. Google him and look at him and see for yourself. He's pretty handsome. Emphasized eternal damnation. So if you don't follow the rules, you are headed for a life of eternal damnation. Fire, your soul, your body on fire for the rest of your living days. Talked about that often. Up to the 3A, I kind of skipped over some of his sermons read worldwide. That's really important as we start to develop this colonial identity. And we'll get it in a couple of pages, that we have a very literate society, well read. Pamphlets are being printed all over, and Jonathan Edwards is not just read in the 13 colonies, but he's read around the world. So that is really important. Again, as we start to develop this idea of what it means to be a colonist and this separate identity from just being a British person that lives in the colonies. And that's really important as we start to move towards our revolution and this idea of, can we even do that? Style was learned in reason, not emotional. Now, so Jonathan Edwards is not an emotional kind of guy. The emotional kind of guy is George Whitefield. Now, George Whitefield is British. Jonathan Edwards is born in the colonies. George Whitefield is British. He has to leave Great Britain because what he's talking about isn't very widely accepted here. And he is credited for all of my Methodist peeps out here. He brings Methodism, or the Methodist religion, into North America. He's up in Middle and New England colonies. His basic appeal was the Bible. That's what he says. He's kind of following that Martin Luther, read the Bible yourself and find it. He is the most influential figure of the Great Awakening just because he is not such on an intellectual level as Jonathan Edwards. Not that he's not smart, but he approaches it in a very different way. Most and founds Methodism in Georgia and South Carolina. And still today in Georgia and South Carolina, there are lots and lots of Methodists, lots of them. We also have this term, old light, new light. And it's very simple if you think very simply what this means. Old, obviously, not necessarily age, but an old way of thinking and a new way of thinking. And the light is this internal light inside. That's the religious kind of thing that they're working for. So old lights, orthodox, traditional, deeply skeptical of emotionalism. We don't need this emotion thing in our church. And we don't need these theatrics, this Bible thumping and this yelling and this throwing of fear of eternal damnation. We just need to be calm and say what we need to say. And New Light supported the awakening for revitalizing American religion and using emotion. So old lights, no emotion; new lights, emotion. Congregationalists and Baptists are going to split. So their churches are going to split into two, following the old lights, following these new lights. And then Baptists are going to attract believers in conversion who long for emotion. And again, think about my granny when we think about Bible and emotion. So that's what she will do. The bottom of page 5 is really important. This results of all of these things will be really important for religion, but also as we go through them, you'll see that they'll be really important for other things as well. It's going to split the denomination, thus creating a ginormous amount of churches. If you go to other countries and look up C in the yellow pages, which I don't even know if you guys know what yellow pages are anymore, but just pretend it's a book with everything in it. And you look for churches in other countries, there's not a lot. And not there's a lot of churches, but there's not a lot of options, right? There's not a lot. You just think about the city of Sullivan or Sullivan County, the wide variety of denominations. I mean, there are so many, some I've never even heard of before, some that are non-denominational. I'm just going to make my own church. And in that aspect, that comes from this Great Awakening, that all these churches split, all these denominations split, and even within denominations, you have splits. Even within the Baptists, you have Southern Baptists, Free Will Baptists, same thing with Methodists. So this is a result, one of the results of the Great Awakening is that we have this giant split. By the 19th century, Baptist and Methodist churches were the two largest in the United States, which again will slowly be taken over by the Catholic Church as we move into the late 1700s. Brought religion to many who had lost touch, like this brings, when we started out, if you recall a couple pages ago, the statistics, only 1 in 7 went to church. This, again, revitalizes the church. Undermines the old clergy. And again, this is this turnover that we'll have throughout our history. Encouraged missionaries and new light colleges. And these are the second sets of our Ivy League college: Dartmouth, Brown, Rutgers, Princeton. Those are all founded as a result of the Great Awakening. They're Baptist, they're Methodist churches, but again, all still part of that Ivy League and still private colleges. Laid the foundation for an anti-intellectual. 6F I would highlight, because the old lights were these theologians. These were these professor-driven intellectual ministers that were overthrown by these, it isn't necessarily what you know, it's how you feel. And so we'll start this anti-intellectual, meaning you don't need to be smart, you don't need to go to school kind of mentality that's going to last for us for a fairly long time. And then number 7, really, really important. The Great Awakening had a strong democratic component. This idea that we had more choice about religion, where nowhere else in the world is there that type of choice that that you actually get to pick what kind of church that you attend. And again, 7B, important example of resistance. So if you remember a couple of pages ago, and I would write this down at the bottom, is that the church was recognized as a royal authority, right? It's a royal authority. The Anglican Church was a royal authority, the Congregational Church. And to overthrow that was this little teeny tiny first step in resistance. And that's always something to kind of keep if you have any kind of long LEQ, long essay, or DBQ about moving towards revolution. This is the first step. It's one that's usually forgotten because it seems so religious in nature, but it really is much more powerful than just a religious movement. 2 things come out of this: mass social movement. We all come together, spread stuff. And then second, even though it doesn't seem like it, we did overthrow royal authority, and it's that royal authority of the church. So that's really important. All right, page 6, education. And again, this is really important part of moving towards creating a society that was able not only to overthrow, but also to govern. And that, again, is a two parts of the story that we really have to pay attention to. It's quite one thing to overthrow authority. It's quite another to be able to manage to run something after you overthrow authority. And again, I will remind you, American Revolution is one of, I always say, the only revolution that was successful, that has stayed successful. All the other revolutions fall apart, mostly because people don't know how to run anything. So, at the top of page 6, education, New England. When you think education, you think New England. Think back to that map that I had on the whiteboard when we were plotting all the different parts, and we specifically paid attention to most important colleges, or most important public, or most, I can't think, most prestigious colleges and universities, and the places where public school was most effective. They were all in New England. The other part of that is the reason people are literate is so they can read the Bible. 100, full stop, that's it. Why am I, as a colonial mom, going to teach my kids to read? So they can read the Bible. Not newspapers, not pamphlets, not novels. It's so they can read the Bible for themselves. Stress Bible reading by community members. Primary and secondary schools established early, and that again is Massachusetts. Literacy will be much, much higher in New England than Chesapeake, that's Virginia, and the Deep South, where only privilege enjoyed the benefits of education. I would highlight Deep South, where only privilege enjoyed. That's another way, again, when you deny people access to education, you also deny them the ability to make changes in their lives, right? To be able to use education to move themselves forward economically. And in the South, that's something we really don't want to do because, again, our society in the South are rich slave owners, poor white people, and then slaves. If those poor white people start to move up, they start to challenge perhaps and maybe understand that slavery takes jobs away from white people. And that's the reason why I shouldn't protect an institution like slavery. Middle colonies will be secondary. They will have primary and secondary education. A lot of their public education will be tax supported, so this beginning of kind of like public supported schools. Spread out population makes school systems a little more difficult. Again, they're not as widely spread as in the South, but enough that it makes it difficult. And most, I would look at B2. Wealthy families send their sons to college in England. It's still where if you're wealthy, you're still sending your sons to England to become educated. And that still is important, again, as we start to develop this identity separate. South, education opportunities limited to all people unless you're wealthy. Nobody else is getting anything unless they're wealthy. Wealthy plantation hired tutors, so those plantation owners, their children are getting taught by tutors at their home and not moving because there's no place for them to go. And higher education. The purpose of higher education, very, very simple, is to train clergy. That's it. Yale was the divinity school. There's still Yale Divinity School, which is still a very prestigious place for anyone that wants to study religion. But it is just for that. There's nothing else, which is why another reason you had to send your kid to England, because if your kid didn't want to be a member of the clergy, there was really no reason to attend. Emphasis placed on religion, classical languages, Latin and Greek. Higher education improved with the establishment of the University of Pennsylvania, which is still one of the last members of Ivy League schools. Benjamin Franklin helped establish this. First American college free from denominational control. And that's, again, part of Ben Franklin's agenda. Like, this is not a religious school. This is this idea of a secular college. More modern curriculum, modern languages, experimentation, reason, and again, it should not be lost on you that this was Ben Franklin. 9 important colleges, and again, this is our Ivy League. Harvard, William & Mary, Yale, Princeton, Penn, Columbia, Brown, Rutgers, and Dartmouth. The bottom of page 6, most Americans too busy working to spend time on art. So again, America, the colonists, and the new young nation really won't have their own artistic movement for quite some time. That's something that looks uniquely and well-defined as American, but we will get there eventually. I just put Phyllis Wheatley in there because the College Board likes to throw in people that have been marginalized. And Phyllis Wheatley is twofold. One, she's a female, and also she was enslaved, and she was taught to read and write, and she wrote poetry. And she, again, was really important as one of the steps towards humanizing people that were enslaved. And then my own personal thing, when I had no clue of this whatsoever, when my husband and I went to London for our 30th anniversary, really it was my present, and I was in the Tower, I had no idea that Phyllis Wheatley was met the king. I had no idea. So she was a pretty notable poet and traveled extensively and had a little thing in the Tower of London, which I was impressed by. On the top of page 7, just because I like Ben Franklin so much. Oh, my hair's all crazy. Just because I like Ben Franklin so much, I can never get this the right way. I just put this whole thing about Ben Franklin up here because I like Ben Franklin. He is one of my favorite founding fathers. If you can't tell, if you haven't, yeah. So, and I got his bobblehead up there. Ben Franklin. And speaking of that, I'm just going to throw this out here. People who work for the devil and cavort in things like theft and stealing and breaking all kinds of laws by taking things out of people's rooms. I'll just say, if you dance with the devil, you get burned. That's all I'm going to say. Okay? Thank you. Back to Ben Franklin. Writings had a profound effect on shaping American culture. Profound. Ben Franklin was at every important, a major event in the history of our country up to the founding of the new nation, ending with the Constitutional Convention. He is really, really, really an important person. My favorite part is when he's in France. So when he's in France trying to get money for the American Revolution, we'll get to that story. Ben Franklin's from Philadelphia. Like, he's all Boston and Philadelphia. He's lived in urban areas his whole entire life. But to become the player, or should I say the playa, that he does in France and in Paris, and having all these French women go absolutely wild, and mistresses, and he's got lots of them. He decides to wear a coonskin cap. That's Ben Franklin. Never probably ever wore a coonskin cap while he was in Philadelphia, I'm fairly certain. But to personify an image and to get the ladies, he wears a coonskin cap. And he even has his picture done in a coonskin cap, which is pretty cool. All right, so Ben Franklin. Ooh, I got about 5 more minutes. So Ben Franklin. Writings had a profound effect. Poor Richard's Almanac. His autobiography, which I have on my shelf, is a classic. He is a scientist, and most of the time in his life he was referred to as Dr. Franklin, which I don't think we have any perception that that was what he was called, but most of the time he was addressed as Dr. Franklin because he was a scientist, not because he was a doctor. He experimented with electricity. I'm sure most of you know that. Bifocals, Franklin's stove. My personal favorite, and why I put it there, 4D, started first private. Now, it's a private library, meaning it's not a public library. Not everybody could participate, and it costs to be in this library, which public libraries, do not. But started the first privately supported circulating library in America, which is after my heart. So, and our last thing we're going to look at today is on page 7. And again, there is never any questions about Ben Franklin, but you will have questions about Ben Franklin on your quiz, just again because I love Ben Franklin. Our last thing we're going to look at is what I had been talking about a couple pages over about the availability of the written word. And again, that is something that is essential to understand how the colonies developed and how they move forward. And so the colonial press, and a press is printing press or the journalist news writing. Manual printing press ran off pamphlets, leaflets, journals, a lot. And again, because colonists could read, and also let's tie that back to that we had the highest standard of living of anywhere in the world. We had a little bit of extra coins. We could purchase these things. And what it leads to, and you need a big, gigantic, probably the only thing on page 7 that you need to know is D2, Zenger case. And it is essentially, crucially important in these steps. And again, when we start looking at our American Constitution and more importantly the Bill of Rights, why these rights were so important to these colonists to write these amendments to add to the Constitution straight away. So make sure you see the Zenger case paved the way for freedom of expression, not freedom of the press. This is what everybody wants. But the first one is freedom of expression, because the freedom of the press will come with a different one. But freedom of expression was for Mr. Zenger to express his opinion and publicly express his opinion, and it just so happened to be in a newspaper. So please make sure you get that expression first. So he had a newspaper, and he was criticizing the governor. He said he was corrupt. And he spoke about those ideas of what that corruption looked like. And he was charged. He was charged with seditious libel. Seditious means you are intentionally saying misleading or untrue thoughts. And he was brought to trial. So in his trial, he said, hey, you might not like what I said, but it's true. This is the truth. And the royal justice ruled printing was enough to convict, regardless of the truth. So what the governor said was, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, you just can't say anything bad about me ever. And as the case goes forward, the jury rules in the favor of Mr. Zenger. It's the truth. You have the ability to express yourself truthfully. And so the newspaper editors will receive some freedom. And again, it's not freedom of the press, it's freedom of expression, that he was able to write an article expressing really the truth, and printing it and publicly circulating it. All right, so we will stop there. Let me put my little tab there so I know where we stopped, especially for those of you that don't listen to this. So I hope you have a great Wednesday. Let me know if you have any questions about anything, and this will be on Canvas. It will be in the lecture section. It will be in today's, and it will be titled Lecture, and it'll be easy to open. So have a great day. Hope it made you laugh at some point along the line, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye. Oh, tomorrow, do you have a quiz? Oh, wait, before I turn that off. Yes, you do. Make sure you know you have a quiz tomorrow. So make sure that not only do you listen to this, but you get ready for a quiz tomorrow. All right, talk to you later. Bye, guys.